the New Orleans Humanist Perspective, presented by the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, following our few principles of humanism.
We're committed to the use of science and reason for understanding the universe and for solving human problems. We're skeptical of untested claims of knowledge, but we're open to new ideas.
We are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and in ending intolerance and discrimination. We are committed to the total separation of religion and government.
We affirm humanism as a realistic alternative to the theologies of despair and the ideologies of violence. We reject the concept of an afterlife and believe in living a full and rewarding life here and now.
We value and respect each individual's right to judge and lead their lives according to their own position, as long as it's respectful of other people, living in a free society.
We hope you enjoy today's program and others in the weeks to follow.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Humanist Perspective. My name is Jim Dugan. I'm your host for this month. My guest this evening is Peyton Burgess. Mr. Burgess was born in Richmond, Virginia, but frequently visited family in New Orleans while growing up. He moved here to attend Loyola University, earning a BA in English and Communication. He worked as a reporter in different cities, then moved to New York to earn a Master of Fine Arts in Fiction from New York University. He now lives in New Orleans with his wife and son, teaching composition and creative writing at Loyola. His writing has appeared in Salon, Chicago Quarterly Review, Bonango Street Fiction Southeast, and Big Muddy. In 2016, his book, The Fry Pans Aren't Sufficing, was published by New Orleans publisher Lavender Inc. And Peyton, thank you so much for being with us this evening. I'd like to start out with a few questions about the scene that you get into when you publish a book, because I don't know anything about it. You do readings, you go to different venues locally. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. I guess, part of being a writer that's been published by a smaller press, you do have to go out there into the community and try to raise awareness, get people interested in your work. There isn't much of like a PR machine that's fueling any sort of interest in a book that's typically, that doesn't have a large reach. So yeah, I mean, I go to events when I can, and which is harder these days because I have a toddler now, and he consumes a lot of my time, which I can't imagine a better way to spend it, honestly. It's funny, I actually rely on him unfairly as an excuse to get out of a lot of obligations that I should be, following through with for the sake of the book, I guess, or for the sake of making important connections with other people in the literary community.
When you do get a chance to go out, when your kid lets you go out, what kind of places do you go to?
Well, the Antenna Gallery, I think, is the first one that comes to mind over in the Bywater. They run a lot. They host a lot of great readings. And I think it's through their sort of the Room 220, I think, is the name of like the literary magazine that plays host. And they've hosted all sorts of different poets, writers, fiction writers, more established and less established writers too. I mean, they really cover the spectrum. So I really admire those people a lot. Sarah Slaughter is plays a big role in keeping all that going. They've hosted writers like Jamie Attenberg, who's a very well-established literary fiction writer, and then people like me. They've invited me there, and it's nice because then you get to meet people that are experiencing, writing and publishing in a wide spectrum in a place like that. And then there are like, the smaller readings at just like bars and so there's the Dogfish reading that happens at just someone's house. There's the Columns reading series, which is hosted by Tulane, and UNO, I believe, is also one of the hosts, and Loyola. I've read at that before. That was probably the biggest reading I appeared at, just because I think just because of all the different, the three larger schools in the city combining to come together.
So a variety of venues, the bars. There's some places specifically for literary events, maybe some coffee shops. And you mentioned when we were talking before the show that the atmosphere of each place really affects what it seems like to you to participate in this.
Yeah, I don't know. That I would argue that it's true, but a lot of that could be sort of dependent on my state of mind. In a bar, clearly you're going to be dealing with a little bit less of a. There isn't this sort of sense of like, everybody's taking themselves very seriously. At a reading like the Columns series, that felt like it was an opportunity, at least, to show that I can do something different and write, be a serious writer, somebody worth considering in a very sort of serious way, in academia or whatever. But at the same time, I kind of did it in my own weird way, and I had a digital screen behind me playing some Bruce Nauman video art while I
So this is there's an aspect of performance art to this. It isn't just reading a selection of your book, waiting for people to politely clap.
There is a sort of weird, like, almost in an odd way, like a caricature of myself that I guess I sometimes indulge in, just to like make people think, oh, okay, so that guy he seems interesting. Maybe his work is interesting too. I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of showing my hand here, but like, I remember a friend of mine when I was in graduate school. A friend of mine, a really talented writer, actually, just coming out with a book soon. Anyway, he I'm not sure if he would like me to use his name.
We'll skip over that part.
But he told me. After, I think it was my first reading I ever gave. It was at the NYU's graduate reading series at the KGB bar. And he after my reading, he came up to me and he said, "Oh, you're great. You were like the perfect version of your of like yourself. You were that like lovable misfit character." And I was like, "Huh." He's like, oh, he's right. I guess that is what I try to come across as, because that might be like interesting to some people. But I think, I don't know, I think that's kind of just, there's a little bit of that, there is a little bit of acting, I think, but it's, I think, I'd like to think that I actually am lovable and sort of, and sort of
a little bit of a misfit.
And it's sort of a misfit. I'm probably more of a misfit, actually, than lovable.
But don't you think a lot of fiction writers would fall into that category?
Maybe like the cliche one, so I guess that's the one I fall into. No, but I guess like, the sort of cliche like drinker, like
you're not Hemingway.
Quirky. No. Yeah, I guess that's a fear, because there is that sort of cliche, like bad boy writer, bad girl writer, whatever. But yeah, I'm still in a place, at least I hope I am, where I can get away with playing around with who I am as a writer, just like I am with my work, because I'm still very much experimenting with what I can do and what I can't do.
We call that finding a voice.
I guess it's finding a voice. I don't know. I think it's more like finding a finding like a heart, or like your sort of your like your thesis in a way, like the central thing that makes you want to share a story with an audience, you know, other than it just being fun to make stuff up, you know, and try to create a world that somebody actually, like, you know, really believes in. But also maybe like I'm trying to work more on being better at making somebody feel like they've learned a way to be happy, or smart, or like learned a way to be like more sympathetic, or just nicer, or just like how to have fun, or you know.
So is writing this kind of material then more a process of self-discovery, or is it a process of trying to lead others?
I think it used to be more of a process of self-discovery for me. Like when I talk about this book, that's usually like what I'm thinking about is how I was a different writer when I was. I mean, a lot of this stuff, you know, I was working on it like 4 or 5 years ago, you know, and then it took like a whole nother year for the physical thing to come together, you know, the editing and like the mapping it out, and then just like the actual publication of it, you know. So I was very different back then, you know. I definitely wasn't as mature of a writer, and a lot of this is me showing that, I think. And then sometimes I actually really enjoy, you know, kind of touching on some of the moments where I'm showing my vulnerabilities as a writer, and like or as a writer that's trying to find out, you know, how they fit into the whole sort of literary world and establishment and
I've heard that said, that in some ways being a writer always involves a willingness to stand naked in front of the world. You know, you have to be somewhat revealing.
I think, yeah, well, you're doing something that you're very close to. You know, at least I'm close to all these stories, and yet at the same time I can admit that none of them are as, I feel like I could probably, I don't know, maybe, I hope I can do better someday, you know, and I'm just being very honest. But I think that I'm very close to them because I look at them and I look back, that was when I was doing this as a writer and being this kind of writer, and that was really important because it eventually, you know, if I'm lucky enough to have, like, you know, what, I don't know, 3 more books, 2 more books, 1 more book, it will be interesting to have the 2 next to one another and compare them and see what I've become, and hopefully that's a good, you know, I've become a good thing. But yeah, I don't know. I think I'm close to them, but I can also, you do have to get tough. You do have to be kind of hard on yourself. And I've gotten better at being hard on myself, which means I hope anyway that I'm better at hearing other people be, you know, read my work that I take very seriously and I love, and do whatever they will with it. You know, I mean,
you can't control that part of the process.
No, but usually it's a really great process because it means if they are reading and interacting with it, then they're engaging with the work and they're collaborating with you. Hopefully the collaboration works out, you know, because the reader's relying on their imagination to make this story that I created their version in a way, you know, because they see things, you know, regardless of how much control I have over the situation, they're gonna see things their way. And hopefully that back and forth between us works out in a very positive way, you know, and sometimes it doesn't always happen. But
well, one thing I'm very curious about is someone who, I don't think of myself in any way as a fiction writer. I don't think I could do that. I haven't the slightest idea where to begin. I assume that people who do that have a certain amount of inborn talent, But you also have education. You have an MFA, and you've studied writing. What's the balance there between that? How much of doing this kind of writing is just something you're born with, and how much is a question of learning how to do it?
I guess it's funny because like when I first started, it seemed so easy and fun, you know, back when I was like 14 or 15, and I was just writing short stories for the first time. It just seems really fun and easy. And then you become, you know, you for some reason, because you're stubborn, you keep doing it, even though, you know, nothing's really happened. You keep doing it. And you realize, wow, I was way off. Like, this is really hard. So, I mean, I think the talent, oh man, that's a tough question, because it's hard, you know, talent is such a weird abstract idea. It's like you cannot see, I guess you can read somebody and not see a sort of talent in them, and then all of a sudden, like 10 years later, you read them again and it's a different book, and they've kept at it for whatever reason, and then all of a sudden you see the talent, and it's kind of odd, because maybe I think that a lot of writers probably have an inborn talent, but that it's not always going to come out, you know, perfectly right away. Like, you know, I like to think that a lot of the things I was good at, or a lot of things that I'm good at as a writer, probably couldn't show themselves back when I was like 15 or 18 years old, because like I just wasn't ready for it. You know what I mean?
No, what does that mean? Like you weren't ready? You didn't have enough life experience, or you weren't ready to reveal it, or
I didn't know how to put it on the page. You know, like the mechanics. So, and I think that is where the sort of education works into. Education kind of, once you get the education and you practice, and practice is a very much a necessary component. You know, like. Just because I'm talented doesn't mean that I'm gonna all of a sudden be able to write this novel at the age of like 20. You know, like I need some time to figure out how to make that talent actually exist on the page. Otherwise, it's not really.
You have to have some acquired skills to think about sentence structures, paragraph structures, story structures, pacing, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I could think of some pretty lame analogies, but it's kind of like, you know, like a really good hot dog is still just going to be like this weird naked sausage on a plate, unless it like comes with all the other stuff, you know, like a nice bun and all that stuff. See how weird and bad I can come up with an analogy. But
this
like,
one's destined for history, though. I think writing is like making a good hot dog.
Well, no, I mean, like, no, that's actually a really good example of showing how sometimes inborn talent doesn't always come out. But like, but I guess if you don't know how to use it, then it's useless. Like, it's not gonna. No one's gonna benefit from it. You know.
It has to be able to. You have to be able to give it. You have to know how. You have to have know-how to give it some form and make it impactful.
Yeah, I like athletes. You know. I mean, look at what athletes have to do. Somebody can be really good at you know somebody can be really good at downhill skiing, but they still have to train every day
and practice
to win, you know, and like, you know, it's just, so that's the way I look at talent. Talent is important, I guess. Talent is important, but practice, you know, makes it actually work. So.
Well, before it gets too late, I think we did want to do a brief reading from the first story in your book. Was that it?
Yeah, I'm going to read I'm just going to read a couple or 3 pages of the title story, The Fry Pans Aren't Sufficing. I'm going to start kind of a couple paragraphs down. Anyway, our narrator is sort of stuck in Atlanta following a storm. We're not exactly sure with the specific details. Obviously, this sounds familiar to a lot of people. But stuck in Atlanta, trying to communicate with FEMA regarding different claims for lost items from the storm. And he hears about this mail auction. Anyway, so here at the mail auction, I think of Chico to keep myself from just retreating back home. I'm hanging around the fluorescent light-induced fuzz of the mail recovery center. I'm interested enough to watch how the government rids itself of unclaimed mail, etc. The large room has the same low-ceilinged, expansive quality that I recall from public school cafeterias, and it makes me just as unsure of where I will sit as it did in the 6th grade. But this is just the kind of pressure I need lately, a healthy, doable challenge. I can imagine somebody telling me that. Postal employee Dara Walsh is filing bidder forms, using her long, painted fake nails to separate the sheets of paper. Her nails are painted with these intricate designs, but I can't make out the designs. She's explaining to a coworker why she was late, something about the school bus never showing up on time, and she didn't want to leave little man alone at the bus stop. Andy, who I'm assuming is Mr. Walsh, was still at his night shift for AT&T because they're doing a big digital install, and Dara just doesn't trust the other parents with her kids because East Point can be rough sometimes. When she really wants to make her point, like emphasize something especially, she stops filing and wraps her nails against the table. All of this makes me love Dara immediately, and I feel like I could tell her anything. She's luminous. She hasn't made eye contact with me yet, so I continue reading over the fine print on the back of the bidder form, but mostly I'm just listening to Dara because now she's talking about this place in Decatur that has good burgers. I can appreciate a good burger. It's the kind of burger that's cooked in its own fat on a griddle that both Dara and I prefer. I really love Dara. She has the same manner I enjoyed in the ladies at the courthouses I visited for work back home. This nurturing sweetness that's in her smiling comes with her unwillingness to pay attention to me. I hope she calls me her, quote, little cracker baby. Weird, I know, but that's how it always was. I have this ugly, pull-hair-inducing desire to be mentioned in her obituary. Dara calls me young man and asks if I need anything. You look lost, she says, smiling and then laughing with her coworker. If you're looking to mail something, go around that corner and take your next right. I do look lost. Most of the people attending the Mail Recovery Center's September 29th unclaimed mail auction are probably the exact same people that attend all the other unclaimed mail auctions throughout the year. They talk to each other with the kind of familiarity you see at the conclusion of a Baptist worship. I imagine they go in big groups to Denny's. They ask the servers to push the tables together. I hope Dara looks at me and thinks to herself that I need help. I want her to ask me what the Allstate adjuster said when he called me. He had called a couple days ago and said my car was definitely totaled. Definitely, I asked? Yes, sir. Like God sneezed all over the inside. Goop. That's the only way I can describe it. He answered with what I will call a Texan accent. But a car is just a car. I'll get over it. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm interested about how you select some of the different themes that you work with. That's a fictional story, but it's probably based on very real-life events. Many people who escaped Katrina have experiences like that, other storms here. So that one's very real world. Some of the other stories in there have a much more dreamlike quality to them. You used the word surreal at one point to describe them. What motivates you to choose those different approaches? How do you pick these little peeks into human nature?
Well, I mean, in a way, it's really a great representation of a first book, really, as far as me experimenting with different things, you know. So yeah, the book's divided into 3 sections. And the first section is a sort of like loosely tied together novella about a couple that's been sort of stuck in Atlanta after Hurricane Katrina, and their relationship is sort of tested nonstop throughout those 3 stories, and they try to make their way back into New Orleans against all sort of like reasonable, you know, good decision-making skills, and in that sense, that those stories are a bit more traditional in their approach, although they are kind of weird and dreamy at times, but they're more traditional in the structure. They have their ups and downs, and there's your sort of typical introduction of like climaxes and resolutions and that kind of stuff. So there's like a container with that story, right? Couple stuck in Atlanta, and then they try to make their way back into New Orleans, and that acts as your sort of like very traditional kind of container for the first section of the book. The second section deals with a lot of stories just engaging in disorientation, and so a lot of those are inspired by sort of my feelings and experiences and sentiment following Katrina after many years, maybe 3 years or so, 4 years, where kind of things start to set in and fester more than and rear their heads in ways that you obviously could never expect. And then this third section again is just very experimental, sort of short prose, almost prose poem moments, and then also some flash fiction where I'm just kind of experimenting more with ideas, really, testing some things, and then seeing if something works, and then pulling away.
We're almost out of time, but I want to try and get an idea here, because to me this always as I can write an op-ed, I can write a tech manual, that's nonfiction. If I have something to say, I have to say, if I have something I'm trying to work out in my own feelings, I have to say, I felt X, it felt like this. But the idea of casting something like that in fictional terms maybe is more natural to you, and so it's hard to explain. I have trouble getting it, and we have about 1 minute for you to answer that question. Yeah. Well, and that's a half-hour question.
I guess like the short answer is that I really have to be sort of lost in the clouds and sort of be engaged in my imagination for it to happen in a good way, where it ends up on the paper, and then I have something to work with. But this first draft, I guess you're talking about that challenge of getting the story, the idea out on the page. For me, it doesn't work unless I'm fully lost in this like imagination of this idea, this world, this place, and these people that I have encountered each other.
So yeah, that part always escapes me. That having to kind of let go of the cognitive aspect and just kind of dwell in this dreamy aspect of a story, and then somehow some inspiration comes out of it and it takes form.
Yeah, and that's the fun part. The hard part is making it like matter to the audience, right?
Thank you, Peyton, for being with us. We hope we've all learned a little bit about fiction writing in New Orleans.